Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. This is a compilation video of some of my greatest hits. Hope y'all enjoy them.
Here's the work aspect of it. One person has to be the game master. In Dungeons & Dragons, it's called a dungeon master. In Vampire, it's called a storyteller. And most other... Game master is a general, kind of a generic term. Game master applies for just about any game. I have been a dungeon master since 1979. I have been playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons since the 70s. I have played other games since then. Vampire Outlaw Trails, I developed that one because we couldn't get a hold of Boot Hill. So my point is, there's a variety of different games. Whatever you enjoy playing is fine. Now, if you plan to start running tabletop role-playing games, yay, good on you. But rest assured that you are not being thrown to the wolves. This is not one of those things where we say, here's the books, read up and go for it. No. You've got lots of support. Don't worry about that. Most role-playing games start out with introductory adventures to help you get started. So it's an adventure that's all set up. It's in the books usually. Not all games do, but usually. And you can have X amount of players of X level, whatever level they are, usually first levels or whatever. And the idea being, this adventure teaches the players how to play and teaches you how to be a dungeon master or a game master. Okay, and they're very user friendly in that respect. But you want to read through the rules first before you try to run a game. Make sure you're familiar with them, because each game has different rules on how to roll dice and what dice to roll and this and that. Dungeons & Dragons is pretty simple because making the characters fairly straightforward, and the dice are pretty straightforward. And I did a video on dice, check those out. You roll the d20 to hit, and for savings throws, and for ability checks like strength, intelligence, wisdom. Usually, your characters generally roll for those: strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma, and comeliness. And each ability defines a different aspect of the character, and you never want to... I had a player one time who came up and said, I want to run this character in your game, and I took one look at it and had 18s, which is the best you can roll. 18, 18, 18, 18, all the way down. And I said, so you rolled 18s on every stat? Yeah, I did. I had it witnessed. By who? My friend. Well, bring him over. I want to see it. Well, you don't trust me? No. Sorry. Rolling 18s on 6 or 7 stats. I forget if you were using comeliness at the time or not, because it came later in a different book. But rolling 6 18s in a row on 3 6-sided dice is ludicrously stupid. It's a statistical impossibility. However, I allowed him to make up his own character for the game, because I wanted him to play. He's not a bad guy. But he rolled surprisingly well. He had, like, I think 4 of his stats were 18s, but they weren't in a row, and, My point being, you got to watch out for stuff like that. It's better to have the dungeon master there when the guy makes up his character, because that way the dungeon master can take note of the character and find out what's going to work in the game. Not every adventure is suited for every character. One of the other things you want to watch out for in this, there are tons of groups that, if you're going to play in their game, they have what are called house rules that aren't in the books. So you have to watch out for that as well. Just as long as the rules are being consistently applied and they apply equally to everybody, whatever the house rules are, it's fine. But if they make a house rule that applies to this character and not that one, then you got to watch out. I've been in games like that. And some of the house rules, I don't like to tell people how to run their game, but there are some game masters that I won't play in their game. Because I think I did a video on this where the guy, I ended up paying 150,000 gold for a 250 gold piece horse. Yeah, normally in the books they're like 250 gold. I paid 150,000 for this horse that was too stupid to eat grass by the side of the road and drink water from the river. It ended up dying on me because I never said I fed it on a well-traveled, grass-covered plain with a river. We were traveling along the river, and this horse was too stupid to eat grass or drink water. So Yeah, at some point you you turn Mother's picture to the wall and get on out because that's not worth playing it. And you have game masters that are like that. Another thing you want to understand is online there are tons of groups on Facebook and on other websites that are just full of people that want to help you. If you're learning to be a dungeon master, and you can go on and ask questions, and they're glad to help you because there's people online who have been gaming as long as me or longer, and they're glad to help because the more players you have in a game, the more of a player base you have, and it's better for the game. Okay. Now, the main thing I'm getting at is when you start running games like this, you are not alone. Okay, you have help. All you got to do is ask. There are tons of pre-made adventures that you can purchase, which are self-contained and have everything you need to run an adventure in whatever game you and your group want to play. And these are called modules. They come in stores. They're usually wrapped in plastic, and you can read the back and find out what it's about. A short synopsis, a little description there. You read it, and it sounds like it might fit my campaign. So then you buy it, and you take it home, open it up, and yeah, I can work it in this way, maybe change a little bit here. But the modules are great because they're self-contained adventures. It's all there. You don't have to change anything, and it's a lot less work than working up an adventure on your own. Once you get the hang of, once you get the hang of running a game, any adventure, I highly recommend that you design your own adventures. There's a reason for that. I'm going to do a whole video about that. I'm going to do a video titled Modules, which will explain that. Now, remember, the other part of this is you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent.
Now, on with the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide. There are a great many books and guides and source books with advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and they have them with all games. The ones that are necessary to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons are the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manuals. You gotta be able to make a character, you gotta be able to run the game, and you gotta have monsters to run up against. You don't absolutely have to have the Monster Manual, but damn, they sure help. In my opinion, there are 3 other books that are exactly the same way as the Monster Manuals. I put them right there along with them. They're you don't absolutely have to have them, but damn, it makes the game so much easier to run. The 3 books are the Manual of the Plains, the Wilderness Survival Guide, and the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide. I talked about the Manual of the Plains in another video. It's a necessary book should your players gain a sufficient level to be noticed by greater beings. The other 2, the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide and the Wilderness Survival Guide, are a necessary addition to any Dungeon Master's game, any Dungeon Master's library, regardless of their level. And these books are so good, you can use the information even if you play in later versions of D&D. Some of the game mechanic stuff may have changed, but the information is brilliant. Okay, so just the interaction between the greater beings and the Manual of the Plains, for example, that's brilliant. And the same with these others. It gives you ideas. Again, the game mechanics may be different, but the information is prime. The Dungeoneer's Survival Guide is an indispensable book, just chock full of pertinent information useful for any underground campaign. I'm sorry, I'm a moron. I had trouble reading my own writing. Imagine that. Ay, ay, ay. It's the Dungeoneer Survival Guide is it's indispensable for running underground games. This is just a basic perusal of the table of contents of that book. And this is going to pique any dungeon master's interest. An overview of the Underdark, natural and unnatural locales and hazards of the area. Movement rules for underground play, such as swimming, climbing, jumping, rope use, and others. Underground combat, because there's always, no matter where you're at, if you're having combat, there's going to be terrain factors that go into it, and underground factors are, oh my god, horrific. They can be really bad. Then there's the general hazards of the underground, such as air supply, hypothermia, mining, cave-ins, structural decay, underground waterways. And they have a list of new equipment, including what can be used as weapons. And by the way, if you're not familiar with a pickaxe, they make excellent weapons. I'm just saying. And they're essentially a mining tool, but yeah, they make pretty good weapons. There are also a great many tables and charts included in this book dealing with all of the above. The primary intent, for my part, of this book is to reduce the arbitrary decisions necessary during a game. Too many times a dungeon master has to make decisions on the fly which affect the campaign for years into the future, and it is never, ever easy. I did one called Setting Precedents. Check that one out. A video of mine called Setting Precedents. Check that out. This book helps to alleviate that situation. The information presented there in this book allows the game to have structure and a consistency with a bedrock foundation in rules. So when a player says, "Well, I don't like that ruling," it's right here in the book. You know, the rules in this book slide seamlessly into the rules in the other books, and altogether they create a framework for you to judge virtually any underground situation. This book is brilliant. All in all, I highly recommend the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeoneer's Survival Guide for any dungeon master, regardless of experience or age. If you plan to run any kind of a Dungeons & Dragons game, this book makes your job a whole lot easier. That's all I'm going to say about that. If you ain't got it, get it, because you're going to need it. Trust me. Questions are going to come up at some point. You're going to need it. Play aid called The Manual of the Planes. This is a wonderful book. Let me get started. Okay, I started running Advanced Dungeons & Dragons way back in 1979. I started playing earlier than that, but I started running it in 79. In all that time, I have found 1,000 play aids that have been put out by various sources. Dragon Magazine, Dungeon Magazine, of various other magazines and different companies. Most of those play aids are cool. They're okay. A few of them are virtually useless. Some of them I found to be extremely outstanding. One of these outstanding aids, one of the best, is called the TSR publication Manual of the Planes. If you're a dungeon master and you don't have that book, you need to get it. That's all I'm saying. I use this book so much that my copy is literally falling apart. And there's a good reason why you need this. You can't just research mythology because, you know, look in the legends and lore, or the deities and demigods, whichever copy you have. Mythology isn't the same, and coordinating all of the different gods in the books are time-consuming. The Manual of the Planes is an excellent reference. It was published in 1987, and when I bought my copy, I've still got it, and was the product of many great minds under the leadership of Jeff Grubb. If your campaign is getting to a high enough level to include the ethereal plane, the astral plane, or any number of powerful extra-planar or extra-dimensional beings, the Manual of the Planes is a veritable storehouse of invaluable knowledge. One look at the table of contents was what hooked me. This book touches on everything necessary for your planar hopping PCs. Table of contents starts with an introduction to the planes. Then it lists spell summaries. Then it moves on to the ethereal plane, the inner planes, the 4 elemental planes, the para-elemental planes, the energy planes, the quasi-elemental planes, the astral plane. And then it moves on to the outer planes, where the majority of the deities reside. It even talks about what is beyond the outer planes. Each planar description is rife with listings of which powers reside where and what their functions are, as well as how magic functions on those planes. The appendixes list the prime material planes, the creatures of the inner planes, the creatures of the outer planes, and the abilities of the various powers. getting this book, if you're dealing with greater powers, gods and demons and like that, if you're putting those in your game and you don't have the Manual of the Planes, you got a long road ahead of you. That's all I'm saying. Keep in mind that many aspects of historical mythology have been modified to fit within the game, so that what you researched and learned in school or college may not apply here. My wife is a prime example. She knows everything there is to know about world mythology. And I mean everything. She knows everything. She can easily teach college courses on the subject. She and I have discussions on how the various mythological beings are wrong in the AD&D books. More than once, she's found her characters in a pickle because the mythological characters in the AD&D tomes are different from the ones that she knows. That's why you got to look at the books as far as what the different gods are, what they do. Odin in the books is not the same as the Odin of mythology. Same with Thor, same with all of the others. And that's what trips up players. Well, that god doesn't do that. Well, yeah, he does. Look, right here. Well, I didn't read that. Well, there you go. The Manual of the Planes is a companion to the legends and lore, or the deities and demigods, depending on which one you have. It's a great companion for that because it shows where each of the powers resides, and it's wonderful. If you, as the Dungeon Master, plan to take your characters out of the Prime Material Plane, then the Manual of the Planes is a must-have. Invariably, at some point, at least one of your player characters will express a desire to travel the planes. It would behoove you to know what they should expect when they get there. One should also know what is necessary to survive on those other planes. After all, how many new planar travelers are prepared for the elemental planes of fire or earth? How about the para-elemental planes? The para-elemental planes, or the astral plane? What happens if the PCs arrive on the slopes of Olympus? Who will greet them? What about the 9 hells, or Tartarus? All that stuff is included in here, with descriptions. Any way you want to slice it, planar travel is a multi-layered pie, and some of those layers are filled with absolute shit. It would be nice to have a shovel. This book serves as that shovel. That's all I'm saying. The book is called Oriental Adventures. This book was published as an addition to the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook and the Unearthed Arcana. I bought my first copy of the Oriental Adventures while I was in the United States Air Force. I believe it came out shortly after the Unearthed Arcana, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure when it came out. I'm not sure which one came first, I should say. Regardless, this tome is a treasure trove of information and rules regarding the Oriental gameplay in an AD&D setting. It was awesome. I loved it. When I was a kid, I grew up watching Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, Saturday morning Kung Fu theater. It was just wonderful. And this book was a wellspring of adventure. I was enamored. As soon as I opened it, I was enamored. As soon as I opened the front cover, boom. This book has new character classes. The Oriental Barbarian, the Bushi, which is kind of a fighter, the Kensei, which is another kind of a fighter called it translates to Sword Saint, but they let you use whatever weapon you want, including unarmed combat. The Yakuza, which is a type of a thief. The monk, the monk should have been there all along. However, they also have Occidental monks. I allow both because the monk that they talk about here is different than the monks in the Oriental Adventure. So I try to differentiate the two. I allow people to run both in my games. Either, I should say. They have the ninja, which obviously is an assassin. The samurai, which equivalents to kind of like a knight or a cavalier. They have the Shukenya, which is a cleric, more or less, and the Sohi, which is kind of like a paladin. It's about the closest thing they've got to a paladin. He's a warrior trained in religion, and he can cast spells and blah, blah, blah. And they have their own type of a wizard called a Wujin, and I loved them. I loved each class had its own special abilities. It was awesome. Every class had their own key powers, K-I, key powers.
They're kind of like mind spirit powers, mind over matter kind of thing. It had cultural information to allow you to run in that setting, so you could run like in China or Japan or wherever. It had its own geography and place names and things like that, so it was a different world, but it allowed you to run in that setting, and it was brilliant. Best of all, in my opinion, it had martial arts. Not only basic martial arts, karate, kung fu, blah, 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 but styles that you could create and ways to combine styles into new styles. So if you learn this style and then you learn that style, you can combine them into your own style and teach it. This was like Shangri-La. Man, I was in love with this book. It is freaking awesome. Running an all-Oriental game is fantastic. The culture, the politics, the religion, the society, it's just, and with this one book, if you have all the other D&D books and you get this book, it allows you to run it because all of this stuff is discussed in the book, Oriental Adventures. It's wonderful, and it's highlighted so you can do it properly. In an Oriental setting, this book is wonderful. I highly recommend it. Okay? Unfortunately, when I was running the game, and one of my players decided he wanted to run a Wu Jin, or a ninja, or whatever. As I recall, he wanted to run a ninja. So he ended up having a Bushi ninja, so he'd get the kind of like a fighter assassin kind of thing going on. I found some problems when I mixed Oriental Adventures with the Occidental Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the standard D&D. Oriental characters are much more powerful due to the key powers and the martial arts. This is fairly easily remedied, and I'm going to go into that here in a second. If you plan to let your players run Oriental characters alongside your standard AD&D player characters, you need to give the Oriental characters some kind of disadvantage, hamstring is too strong a word. Not hobble them either, but you understand what I'm saying. You got to give them a bit of a. I had the word in my mind just a minute ago and it went away. Amazing. Sucks getting old. My point is, you gotta give them a bit of a cultural disadvantage. I usually what I found works really well is I usually make the Oriental player characters learn common during actual gameplay. So for the first several months, they rely on these Occidental characters, and you develop that friendship, and that way when they're in the course of normal gameplay, it works out. And this levels the playing field and gives the Oriental player characters a reason to rely on these Occidental players. Now, also found out that during the course of gameplay, these Occidental characters want to learn martial arts. And the reason martial arts are great is because anybody can learn them. The bad part is you have to be careful letting martial arts into your game, into a standard game, because I mean, it works good in Oriental settings because anybody can have them. In Occidental Dungeons and Dragons, if you let an Oriental character come in and he's got martial arts, he can smack somebody with his open hand and do as much damage as a sword. So yeah, that can be a problem. One of my favorite character classes in Oriental Adventures is the Kensei, because I take, or the monk or whatever, one of those, because they you can heavily rely them. The monk relies on martial arts. The Kensei can take martial arts as a specialty weapon and gets all kinds of bonuses. He could be butt naked and still have his weapon, his specialty weapon. So, but this simple remedy about the language barrier allowed one player to run it was a Bushi ninja in my Occidental campaign for 13 years. It was wonderful. Okay, I took the player character. Basically it took the player character a while to learn common. He was forced to rely on and befriend the other players, and it really worked out well, because then when he had learned common, he didn't need them anymore. But they had developed that rapport, and there was a reason for them to stay together in the group. You see what I'm saying? Take your time letting them learn common. Don't. Okay, well, take it as your language and you're done. Don't do that. Take your time. Let them learn the language. That will allow your players. Oriental players in an Occidental setting kick everybody's ass. So just let them. You got to give them some kind of a disadvantage. So anyway, that's my advice when you're doing it. Otherwise, if you run just a regular Oriental campaign with everybody running Oriental characters, man, knock yourself out. Do whatever you want. It's awesome.
A book out there I want to talk about. So I'm going to talk about this book. It's called Years of Adventure. Now, normally I don't talk about high-profile gamers because they do their own thing, and if they're successful at it, good on them. This is something a little bit different. This is a celebration of Dungeons and Dragons, and this book was put out years ago. It's called Years of Adventure, and it is packed full of history and nostalgia and all. It's just a wonderful book. I was searching my bookshelf for something to read the other day, and I happened across a really great book I've had for some time. It's called Years of Adventure. It was written by a conglomeration of authors, including Harold Johnson, Steve Winter, Peter Adkison, Ed Stark, and Peter Archer. It was published in 2004. The book is a celebration of Dungeons and Dragons and has pieces added. It's got little excerpts in there added by a number of really high-profile players and people. For example, the foreword was written by Vin Diesel, the actor of the Fast and Furious movies, for example. Other contributing celebrities included Stephen Colbert, Ben Queller, Will Wheaton, Dave Myers, among others. I'm not a big fan of Will Wheaton, but that's only because of his political stuff. The man knows gaming, and he's good at it. Okay, so we got to give him props for that. At any rate, I highly recommend this book. If you're an old hat wargamer like me, I started in the 70s. I've been running Advanced Dungeons and Dragons since 1979. This book, I honestly, I was a little misty-eyed, a little teary-eyed when I read this book. It's so good. The book details the history and the rich culture of the world's oldest and greatest tabletop role-playing game. It details how to play and how the game got its start. There's sections on Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, Mystara, Spelljammer, Ravenloft, Dark Sun, even Planescape. I only played in, I played in Greyhawk, I've played in Dragonlance, I've played in Forgotten Realms, I even played Spelljammer once. I've played in Ravenloft, but I've not played in the others. But these others, they're all in there. It goes into detail about the later editions, second through and on. There are personal accounts of how people became involved in the game and how it has changed their lives for the better. For those of you who don't know, if you get started in Dungeons and Dragons under a good dungeon master, he's like a good coach, a football coach or whatever. He's not just about the game. Lessons in sports can last you a lifetime. It's the same thing here. Somebody wrote an article one time, everything important in life I learned from Dungeons and Dragons, because you learn money management, you learn good from evil, you learn how to take care of yourself, you learn business strategies. It's all in there. It is all in there. I've heard of schools allowing students to run games in their classrooms because it's educational. You can't play these games, any Dungeons and Dragons game, without reading, writing, and mathematics. You just can't do it. It makes playing role-playing games makes your life better on so many levels. Not only is it fun, and allows you a gaming group to play with. And I'm talking tabletop role-playing games, not that stuff they do online where you never see nobody. I'm talking about tabletop role-playing games. It gives you a group of people that you can be friends with, you can socialize with outside of the game, and you can really, now of course people have bad experiences. I'm not saying they don't, but I have lifelong friends from gaming. I met my wife through a fellow gamer named Randy, and God bless you, Randy. I owe you big time. Everything positive in my life has come from gaming, directly or indirectly. I'm talking everything. It's not just, it's going to sound weird, and I'm not trying to get, holier than thou, but it's not just the gaming. It's the people in the game. Okay? Check out some of my other videos for the other games that I play as well. Starfleet Battles, Recon, it's all there. This particular book is about advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but it's the same concept. It talks about the business side of this book, talks about the business side of the game and the history of how that aspect shaped the game that we see today. Some of the business necessities and the business happenings, the deals that were made from the different companies that own the game, that kind of thing. How Gygax had to sell the game to this company or whatever in order to keep it going. But it shaped what we see today. Now, there is a new form of Dungeons and Dragons called AD&D, I think it's called. I don't play it. I don't intend to play it. But they're essentially taking it away from the players. As I understand it, they're incorporating artificial intelligence dungeon masters, and I am never, ever going to play Dungeons and Dragons under an artificial intelligence. It's just not going to happen. You need a human dungeon master. That's the part of the game. That's what makes this game unique, is the camaraderie among the players and the dungeon master. Anybody who doesn't get that doesn't need to be running this game. Okay? That's my 2 cents worth. Now, that being said, if you're into that kind of thing, knock yourself out. The whole point of the game is to have fun. The reason I'm doing this video is very simple. If you are or aspire to be a dungeon master, you need to have an understanding and a reverence for what came before. I don't care what edition you're playing. If you're playing 5th edition, you got to know what came before. This book tells the history of how we got to this point and how we all came to love Gary Gygax's opus. And I'm going to tell you something. There are people out there who play Dungeons and Dragons, and they're really, really good at it. Okay? Some of them have YouTube channels about it. I've seen them. I very seriously doubt any of them have ever played 1st edition. Or at least many of them. There's a lot of them that maybe have, but there's some out there that don't have any idea the flavor of 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons, advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the old red box, that kind of thing. There has to be a knowledge and a reverence for what came before. Otherwise, you have no idea what's going on. You can enjoy the artwork of the later games. You can enjoy if you enjoy the complexity of them, knock yourself out. I'm not gonna talk about you. Not, at least nothing bad. I'm gonna say, hey, good on you. I prefer the simplicity of the original game, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's tweakable, so you can make it what you want. There are no two dungeon masters in the world, anywhere in the world, who run the game the exact same way. So you can make the game your own. What I disliked about later editions were the fact that they were ruled and regulated to death. There's a rule covering everything. it's hard for a dungeon master to make the game his own. In Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you can do that. On top of that, you can make a world that is unique. On top of that, this world, no matter how you make the world, it's going to have the flavor of the original inspiration, meaning Excalibur, Lord of the Rings, mythology, that kind of thing. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons has that flavor. And I don't think the later editions have lost that somehow. I like playing 3.5. My son runs a good game. I can do 5th edition. It's not my favorite. Again, my son runs it. He's good at it. He can keep track of all that stuff. But I got to be honest with you. They're too complex for me, and I prefer the flavor of the original. I don't do 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons videos for a reason. I do Advanced Dungeons and Dragons because, in my opinion, it's the best. Story versus rules. And this is an age-old conflict. It has been debated since Gygax first invented the game. I'm pretty sure some of his players and he probably had the same debate. I've seen players and dungeon masters literally come to blows over this debate, and it's never, never good. Never is it good. The debate usually goes something like this. The player is using the rules to further his player character or his plan versus the bad guy. The dungeon master suddenly explains that because of the story he wants to further, his bad guy or some other NPC can suddenly ignore rules X, Y, and Z, which of course derails the player character's plan. The player objects. The dungeon master tries to explain how his story trumps the rules, and the debate rages on. It escalates from there. It is never, ever good. I have seen the best of friends lose friendships over this. It's crazy. It's, again, never good. I knew these two guys, Mark and what was his name? I haven't talked to the guy in freaking years. I think his name was Barry. Anyway, these guys were friends for years, since grade school. And right out of high school, Mark was running a game, and Barry was using the rules, and Mark said, no, because blah, blah, blah. The debate raged on, and they didn't speak, if I'm not mistaken, for something like 8 years. I mean, you can damage friendships with this. It's crazy. One of the primary rules of being a good dungeon master is consistency. Consistency is the key, in my opinion, to making a game good because it brings stability. Without stability, your players can't plan or expect any desired output, no matter how hard they try. There is no reason to try to achieve success situation A if there is no stability in the game. You cannot plan an assault. You cannot plan an action. You cannot, if you're in the middle of combat and you plan something and it doesn't work because of a story trope or a story idea that the game master has, and this is in any game, it's not just Dungeons and Dragons, it's any game. If your player plans something during combat and your story prevents it from happening, they're going to be angry. Expect it. So here's the thing. Don't do that. That's the simple solution. Without stability, your players cannot plan or expect any desired output no matter how hard they try. If a player character plans to drop a piano on the bad guy, but suddenly without warning and for whatever reason, the laws of gravity suddenly change, the player's going to be pissed, and rightly so. Story can never, ever, ever trump rules. Never, ever, ever. Period. You're going to have people argue this, and people listening to this video will put comments about, oh no, the story has to further. Yes, but it cannot trump the rules. The rules exist for a reason. if the story trumps the rules, then there are no rules, and it's pointless to play the game. You cannot play a game without rules. Story can never, ever trump rules. As a dungeon master, it is your job to create the adventure. That adventure has to fit within the rules. Period. If your players even begin to suspect that the rules are not consistent or are somehow not being consistently applied, your game's done. You're not going to have people show up to play. Your game literally will be done. Your bad guys, your NPCs, your story, your world, your game, your players all depend on those rules. Now, I'm not talking about the rules in the book. I'm talking about whatever rules you use. If those rules are the rules in the book, amen. But it also applies to house rules. If during week 1, player characters are not allowed to, if for example, if you in the beginning of the game, if you outlaw precast spells, and in the second week, precast spells are still outlawed, and in the 5th week they're still outlawed, and in the 10th week they're still outlawed. When the characters reach 15th level, they're still outlawed. And then suddenly your bad guy shows up with all these precast spells, magic missiles and shocking grasps and what all. Look up my video, precast spells. But if suddenly your bad guy shows up with all these precast spells, yeah, your players are going to be pissed, and rightly so. Rules have to apply equally to everybody. Good guys, bad guys, NPCs, all of it. Okay? Whenever I run a starting campaign, I generally, unless the players object, I allow first level characters maximum hit points at first level. I also do this for the bad guys because the rules have to be consistently applied. Okay. If the players, for example, if the players roll for their hit points, but the bad guys have maximum hit points at first level, yeah, at level 1, the players are going to be pissed. And rightly so. Okay? Everybody, your bad guys, your NPCs, the players, the PCs, your story, your world, everything, all the players, everything depends on those rules. They have to. Your entire world and your entire game has to fit within those rules. And that includes your story. Anytime there's a question or a deviation, there has to be an explanation within the rules. If not, then you're breaking the rules. Okay? There's a movie out there called The Gamers, Darkness Rising. If you have not seen it, you can watch it for free on YouTube. It is an absolutely hilarious movie. It is absolutely wonderful. Go ahead and go check that out. There's this part in there where the guy says, "Oh, story trumps rules." No, it doesn't. It can't. It cannot. It cannot ever trump the rules. The rules have to be consistent. Whatever the plan, the plot, your NPC abilities, the master villain's abilities, etc., they all have to fit within those rules. They all have to. If they do not, you have failed in your designing of the adventure or the campaign. This is the sacred cow of being a dungeon master. When I talk about consistency in the rules and the application of those rules, this is what I'm talking about. You have players who for whatever reason, want to weasel every iota of, every ounce of extra whatever out of every single rule. That's fine, as long as the rules apply to everybody. I had a guy years ago, this guy, he was the quintessential weasel. His name was David. He weaseled every freaking ounce of everything out of every rule to make his character succeed. And amen. It was good that he was thinking. It was good that he was trying to do that. If you're not trying to do that, then what the hell are you playing for? You want your character to succeed. Okay? But then he got upset when the bad guys were doing the same thing. Well, I thought of that. Yes, you did. And I appreciate it. The rules have to apply equally to everybody. Now, if it's a secret thing that the bad guys wouldn't know about, that's a whole different critter. But the use of rules applies to everybody. Okay, that's a whole different critter. Rules have to apply equally to everybody. If your story does not fit within the rules, then what the hell are you running the game for? It's all. I mean, the story is make believe, but if the rules don't matter, then how are you running a game? It's that simple. Story versus rules. This is an addendum to the previous video of that title. I did a video a while back called Story versus Rules, wherein I made it perfectly clear that the story can never, ever, ever trump the rules. If the players ever get the idea that the Dungeon Master's NPCs can circumvent the rules, then your game is done. Your game is literally done. They will never trust you again, and this is absolutely true. Believe me when I say that this is a campaign ender. You understand? It will end your campaign. Now, one thing I've found that gets players rattled is when they think that an NPC is doing something that they couldn't normally do. There is, of course, an explanation for the situation, and it is well within the rules, but for whatever reason, that explanation eludes the players for the moment. For example, one of my major villains in a campaign I was running was a vampire. He acted as a vampire, and the group had figured out that he was indeed a vampire. They were all in on it, and they knew he was a vampire. They thought he was they thought that he couldn't do anything outside during daylight, so they were pretty safe there. Then he attacked them in broad daylight. They barely survived and had to flee the battle. I got a lot of questioning looks, and of course, the accusations started. I simply smiled and said, well, if he's a vampire, then the sunlight should have fried him, right? They began yelling and cursing at me because they had proven that he was a vampire. They knew he was a vampire. There was no way that couldn't happen. And I simply smiled again and said, okay, so if he's a vampire, what then? This got my players to thinking. They began researching and investigating, and after a long while, they ultimately discovered that this particular vampire had a ring that prevented him from taking damage from sunlight, among other specified sources. They were able to separate him from the ring. They actually chopped his hand off, and he died like any other vampire. And that's the key, okay? If you can make it seem like there's other stuff going on, it makes your players think. It gets their focus on something else. It shifts the focus. I did a video on that a while back. Go check it out. It appeared that this villain could bypass the rules, but in reality, he could not. There were extenuating circumstances which the group was able to cancel by chopping off his hand and get rid of the ring. This is only one example of curveballs that can make the game interesting and force players to think and investigate. One of the really, really great things about Dungeons and Dragons is the role-playing aspect. In that game, they were trying to research this situation, and they found that they needed library research. They needed to talk to people who were learned, sages, things like that. And so this group was traveling from city to city, expending lots of money and resources to try to figure out why this vampire could stand out in sunlight and not get fried. You know what I'm saying? And it was a big deal, and it took a while in game time, and it gave them opportunities to role play with NPCs that weren't out to kill them. It gave them the opportunity to be normal people per se, or as normal as they can get in a role-playing game. My contention here is sometimes you got to throw them curveballs. Sometimes there's got to be things they don't understand so that they can research and find things out. If a player figures out that they know everything and there are no surprises left in the game, then yeah, it's going to be a dull game. And the last thing you want your players to think is, damn, he runs a dull game. You know what I'm saying? You got to keep them on their toes. You got to keep throwing curveballs. You got to keep giving them things to figure out. Because if they can't figure it out, if there's nothing to figure out, all hacking and slashing, they may as well run a video game. You know, and that's the last thing we want, because video games are antithetical to tabletop role playing. Not that I don't enjoy video games, but tabletop role playing games are what we did before video games, and they, in my opinion, they're better because they allow interaction with people, not just online. So, you know, I think that if everybody stopped playing tabletop role playing games and went to just hardcore online gaming, even with other people, our world will seriously suffer in real life, because you're not getting social interaction with people. You're just talking to them online, and that there's not a comparison. I'm sorry, there's no comparison to that. At any rate, keep throwing your players curveballs, but remember, it's got to be legal curveballs. All right, keep that in mind, because if they find out the rules really don't apply, then you're screwed. Variety really is the spice of life, especially in a game. As a dungeon master, there are a ton of different scenarios you can confront your players with. Monsters, bandits, soldiers, evil wizards or clerics, traps, natural disasters, lots more. You're limited only by your imagination. When you design your campaign, your main villain has a specific motif and has specific underlings which may regularly encounter your players' characters. This is to be expected, but that's not what this video is about. What I'm talking about is the random encounters and generic events which are unrelated to your primary plot. The monsters in one area will not be common in other areas. Not every road has bandits lurking in the bushes. Not every soldier a group runs across will cause them grief. Evil wizards and clerics are not a dime a dozen. If any area in the world had a natural disaster every single day, I dare say nobody would live there. Traps are varied and rare. They must be placed there by someone. What I'm saying is that too many of any one thing makes your game stale and boring. For example, if every door, chest, and random object is trapped, it presupposes that someone is setting these traps, and that someone had to have an enormous amount of spare time on their hands. Furthermore, if your player characters encounter such traps everywhere, they will, everywhere, every door, every opening, every chest, everywhere, they will be unwilling to try doors, open chests, or even walk around. Traps are supposed to be a surprise. If they're everywhere, they lose their spontaneity. And too many of the same kind of trap can be stale as well. Vary your encounters. Use different monsters. Make some soldiers helpful. It's all about the new and exciting. A lack of traps can eventually lull the player characters into a lackadaisical routine where they never bother to check for traps. That is when the traps are most effective. See what I mean? I was running a game years ago, and I had players, had a group with 2 thieves, and these guys they check for traps on everything. So I designed a fortress with a whole bunch of short hallways with doors at the end. And there was only one way to go, and they were checking for traps on every door. There was never any traps, and it just went on and on and on and on. It was like a maze in there, Eventually, they got bored and stopped checking for traps. Human nature. You get tired of it, you stop checking. Over and over and over. There's a door, I'm opening it. Okay, there's a door, I'm opening it. Okay, I'm another door, I'm opening it. That kind of thing. 20 or 30 doors down the line, suddenly there was a trap. You see what I'm saying? It adds to the excitement. If there's traps everywhere, and I'm using traps as an example, but it's the same thing if you use the same kind of monster, or the same kind of bandit, or the same kind of this, or the same kind of that all the time. If you use the same kind of trap constantly, or if there's traps everywhere, they lose their luster. It stops becoming exciting, and it stops being exciting, and it becomes tedious. The last thing you want your game to do is become tedious. At any rate, I hope this finds everybody well, and I hope you enjoy running Dungeons and Dragons as a dungeon master. Getting tongue-tied over here. But I hope you do. And again, this is just advice. I've been playing this game a long time. I've been running it since, oh Lord, over 40 years. 40 years. And the last thing you want your game to do is become tedious. So just vary it up, liven it up a little, do different things. Your players will very much appreciate it. One of the mistakes many young dungeon masters do is to give player characters massive amounts of experience points to boost their levels quickly. In my opinion, this is bad form. If you want to keep your players happy, make a better game. Make your game fun and challenging so they will not mind climbing in level at the standard rates. If you want to run a scenario or a module that is for 8th level characters, make sure your players are experienced enough to run 8th level characters. If they already are, then you can have them make up 8th level characters so you can run the module. When you artificially boost your player character levels, you are robbing the players of a great deal of fun as they bypass experience and familiarity with their own characters. If you hand out tons of experience and a player character jumps from 2nd to 8th level, just think about all of the adventures they've missed out on. 3rd to 7th level adventures are awesome. Part of those adventures includes learning about their characters, building their characters, and developing the characters' personalities. This is an integral part of the role-playing process. When player characters are catapulted in level, the players are robbed of this gaming experience. As a dungeon master, patience really is a virtue. If you have a great scenario you want to run your player characters through, wait until they high enough level to do it. Trust me, your players will appreciate it and will thank you for it later. I had a situation happened years ago where a guy had us make up I want to say they were 3rd level characters. And then the module he was running us in turned out to be 9th level. So, yeah, we were wholly inadequate for that. By the same token, I had another dungeon master, who our characters were like 9th level, and we'd worked up that high, and the module he ran us in was for 3rd levels. So it wasn't a challenge. Balancing it out is important. Now, that being said, if you have 3rd level characters and you want to run an 8th level campaign, yeah, you got to get them up to there. You can't just bump them up to 8th level and then run the campaign that the scenario that you want to run. You have to let them progress at their own rate. You have to let the game develop on its own. Part of being a dungeon master is working all of those higher level scenarios into your game in ways that make sense for the plot. That's a huge part of it. So when you artificially boost characters like that, it becomes contrived, for lack of a better word. You have to. It's no longer about the players. It's about the scenario you want to run, and that should never happen. The game should always be about the players. Now, should you kowtow to the players? No, of course not. But you have to make sure that the players are having fun and working up their characters to the appropriate levels to run the scenario you want to run. That's part of it. That's part of the process. You can't skip the process. As the famous Mr. Miyagi once said, "First learn walk, then learn fly." Extremely intelligent villains will plan ahead for a variety of circumstances and situations. Have a way out, that's the primary thing. A secret tunnel, a hidden passage or door, a trap door, etc. is not out of the realm of reason. If the villain has access to magic spells, a quick invisibility spell, feign death, meld in, that one's a little tricky, but meld into stone, transport via plants, spider climb, rope trick, plane shift, teleportation, word of recall, etc., they can effect a needed getaway. Remember, villains of this stature didn't get to their status position by being lazy or failing to plan ahead. All right? Another thing that many dungeon masters fail to realize is that any villain worth his salt will use whatever means at his disposal to give himself every advantage in combat. Tricks, traps, and triggered attacks work for almost every villain. Punji stake traps, falling rocks, false passages, etc. will delay and damage foes prior to the actual meeting. Remember, the Viet Cong had no magic, and their booby traps did considerable damage. Most of the time, they were nowhere around. They set up the trap and leave. Somebody's going to run into it. Do not discount a torch and oily floors. If the villain has magic because if there's oil all over the floor and the player characters have to go through there, some no-name peon runs out there and throws a torch. Yeah, that's a significant thing. If the villain has magic capabilities, so much the better. Glyphs and wards are amazingly effective. Symbol spells are even more so. Remember, a smart person, in this case the villain, sets himself up for victory. Anything he can do to thin the ranks of the enemies arrayed against him is fair game. A black dragon is comfortable in a pool of acid. Hint, hint. As for the actual combat, if the villain knows the player characters are coming, there are whole arrays of precautions he can take. Minions can set up ambushes, including area effect triggers and traps. Traps and tricks can be used, as I stated earlier. Packs of guard dogs can be set up on them. It all depends on the resources of the villain. Local constabulary can be influenced to attack them through bribes or deceit. Literally, the sky is the limit. If the villain has magical capabilities, remember to bolster his person with protective spells like Stone Skin, Contingency, protection spells, invisibility, etc. Once combat is joined, the villain needs to deal as much damage as possible in the shortest time as possible to as many enemies as possible. Think the best bang for the buck. Fireballs, cloud kill, that kind of thing. Call lightning, flame strike, etc. These are all very, very effective. Spells with no saving throws should have preference, because when a player character is a high level individual, their saving throws are easy to make. And if you have a big bad spell, but they make their save, the spell sometimes the spell is useless. Fireballs, you save, you take half damage, but you still take half damage. But if a spell is negated by a saving throw, it's almost useless against higher level, more powerful creatures. Chain lightning is especially useful against groups of those pesky fighter types that just love their plate mail. Let me tell you. Dragons should start out with breath weapons and take to the air as soon as possible. Strafing runs are sheer murder on ground troops, because it's very difficult to hit a moving target in the air with a bow. Spells, they can use spells against it, and that's cool. But this is the most effective thing a dragon can do. The only dragon I can think of that's less effective for would be a black dragon. But black dragons spewing acid from the air are still pretty damn effective. That's what I'm saying. Powerful demons and devils who are immune to fire can detonate fireballs on their feet, and anyone within the range of the spell is toast. The area of effect, Don't forget the melee capabilities of the villain. A lot of the villains, they have powerful magic weapons. Dragons are hellacious in a fist fight because they use claws and bites and like that. It's just nasty. It's absolutely nasty. After all of that, if the battle is going against the villain, he should not be afraid to run away. Remember, the way out remember the way out that he's planned for, and multiple ways out are better. He who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. Discretion is the better part of, well, valor may not be the right word for the villain, but you get the idea. If the player characters let the villain escape, they should feel suitably pissed off. After all, he was within their grasp and he survived. This should spur them on to do better next time. They should strive to not underestimate him in the next encounter. If your villains are pushovers, your players will not take your game seriously. They will eventually grow bored and find another game. Conversely, if your villains are all unbeatable super geniuses with 30th level spell capability and immunities out the yang, the players will wonder why you hate them and want to kill off their player characters with no chance of victory. Your villains need to be appropriate for the story and your players' character. Your players' characters have to have the capability to defeat them. I'll get it out in a minute. Your villains need to pose a challenge for them, but not overwhelm them. Remember, your goal is not a total party kill, but rather the appearance of an attempted total party kill. If player characters have no chance, but the players force the confrontation, give them an obvious way out. Then, if they press on with the combat, you're in the clear. You can kill all of them and with a clear conscience because they had a way out. They chose to continue. Play your villains to their strengths according to their intelligence and motivations. An intelligent villain will not expend resources or take unnecessary risks on a battle he does not have to win. If the player characters invade his home, he may fight to protect it, but if the home is not necessary to the culmination of his grand scheme, he should have no qualms of abandoning it if necessary. But also keep in mind that in the villain's home, wherever possible, security, such as traps, tricks, guards, alarms, etc., will be overlapping, tight, and innovative. This guy has had a long time to make his home secure, and he's not stupid. I have seen dungeon masters run really brilliant games, and when it gets to the culmination where they're fighting the big bad guy, they kill him off in 2 turns because the bad guy is not appropriate to the player characters. During the course of the adventure, you have to keep note of your player characters and update your bad guys, because if you set them up for if you run them from first level and the bad guy's appropriate to them, then by the time they get to 6th level or 10th level or whatever, they're going to overpower him. So you got to keep that in mind. Okay? Your bad guy's power level has to be flexible. As a dungeon master, remember, your objective is to create a fun game for your players. According to the D&D rules, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, 1st edition, that's what I play. As I recall, a player character is unconscious at 0 hit points and dies at -10. Now that I haven't used those rules in a long time, I don't play that way, but according to the rules, I think that's how they do it. In my games, a player character is unconscious at 0 hit points and dies when he loses enough hit points to drop him to his Constitution +1 below 0. So in other words, if your Constitution is 15, you're unconscious at 0, and because your Constitution is 15, you have to get to -16 in order to die. It makes the characters a little more survivable. A character does not automatically lose hit points in my game when they reach 0. Only if they have been hit with a critical strike. That denotes a serious hit with significant blood loss. So, if you get hit with an arrow in the arm, you're not going to bleed to death. If you get critted in the arm with an arrow, there's blood loss. When you hit 0 and fall unconscious, the blood's still pumping out. You're gonna lose hit points every round until you die. And generally, I do you -1 hit point per critical hit. So if you get hit 3 times with crits and fall unconscious, you're losing 3 points a round. Okay, critical strikes are intended to be scary. That's why they call them critical strikes. According to the book, natural hit points recovery is 1 per day, and that's usually a good rule of thumb. What I do
I like to take a character's constitution into the equation. So what I do is I do 1 or your constitution's hit point adjustment, whichever is greater. So if your constitution gives you 1 extra hit point when you roll your dice, hit point adjustment, then you get 1 or 1, 1, But if it's 2 or 3 or 4, if you're 3 or 4, if you're a fighter type, then you get that instead of the 1. So it works a little bit better for recovery. At lower levels, it allows your character to be a little more versatile on recovering, because nobody likes to keep going back to town for healing spells, or to, God forbid that little first level cleric with his 1 healing spell is gonna help you. So my contention is, short of investing in other means like buying a buttload of healing potions, that's expensive. For first level characters, it's really expensive. So anyway, plus, like I said, clerics and potions and like that, they can aid in the recovery. There's other things that you have to take into account when you talk about recovery. One of the things dungeon masters sometimes ignore is the effect of injuries on gameplay. For example, a player who simply counts points off of his character sheet is missing the flavor of tabletop role-playing. A dungeon master who simply rolls damage and announces how many points are to be deducted is robbing his player of the experience of the game. Injuries should affect gameplay. If I get hit and I lose an eye, I get minuses on my bow because I don't have, my depth perception is shot. If I'm using a big 2-handed warhammer and I'm getting in there ready to whack somebody and somebody crits me on my arm and I can't use my arm anymore, or worse, chops it off, yeah, using that big heavy hammer with 1 hand, yeah, there's going to be minuses at least if you can use it at all. See what I'm saying? Injuries affect gameplay. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Hypothetical scenario: a group is fighting an evil wizard. And I talk about this in another video I'm going to do here shortly, or maybe I've already done it. Let me see. Hang on. Monsters. No, it's coming up here shortly. Those pesky spell casters. The group is fighting an evil wizard. Usually it's a big bad, and we're off to slay the wizard. Da, 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 da. One fighter throws a spear which lodges in the wizard's chest. That wizard is going to have a hell of a time casting any spells. And people go, well, I don't understand. He just got hit, that's all. Yeah, he's got a freaking length of wood sticking out of his chest. Precast spells and items that he has, I would be reasonable for him to use. But mustering the concentration to literally alter reality, which, by the way, is what spellcasting is, will be exceedingly difficult with a 5-foot shaft of wood sticking out of your chest. Not to mention the spearhead that's lodged somewhere inside and chewing up your internal organs every time you move. It's kind of detrimental to spellcasting. See what I mean? What I do is whenever a melee or missile weapon is lodged in a wizard, I make that wizard roll a save versus petrification to take any action whatsoever. If he as far as spellcasting goes, if he wants to cast a spell, I make him roll that save, the versus petrification, with a minus equal to the level of the spell he's trying to cast. So in other words, I'm a wizard, I'm going to cast a 4th level spell to really screw you guys up, but I got a spear sticking out of my chest, or an arrow, or whatever. I have to roll a saving throw versus petrification at -4 because it's a 4th level spell. You see what I'm saying? This effect lasts until he is healed somehow. So evil clerics are a nice thing to have in the background if you have your monsters there. Because, the wizard's he can kill the party, but God forbid he gets hit because I need to get rid of this thing. The cleric can come up and pull it out and heal, and then, you can go ahead and do your thing. Non-spellcasters with these same impediments have to remedy the situation, remove the item, get healed, or they must make a save versus petrification as well in order to take any serious actions. They can move, they can run away, or at least hobble away, as it were, roll if they're down, that kind of thing. Get out of the combat area. Keep in mind that if you choose to use this system as a house rule, they must also apply to the NPCs and the PCs alike. You cannot make a rule like that and use this rule. And again, this is an optional rule. I'm just saying. But you cannot make a rule like that that will detriment a player's ability to in combat or whatever, without also that same rule applying to your monsters, because that would seriously unbalance the game. So whatever rule you use, you have to apply them equally to everyone. Trust me, your players will notice. So anyway, that's pretty much all I got, I think, for for the injury and recovery. I hope this video helps the newer game masters. Running games is extremely rewarding. The objective of the game master is to provide an enjoyable adventure for the players. You want to challenge them, but you don't want to murder them. If they die, that's one thing. But you don't want to be what's called a killer dungeon master, killer DM. You don't want to do that. People notice. If you have to make a new character every single time you come and play, yeah, it's time to play someplace else. You know? I played with one guy who had us make up a character, and making a character in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, if you're being very in depth like I like to be with the record keeping and everything, yeah, it's about an hour and a half process. So you make the character, you get it all fleshed out and everything, you got to buy all your equipment and everything. An hour and a half later, you're ready to play, and then he says, "Oh, make a roll." Okay, percentage roll. Oh, I got an 02. Well, guess what? Your character died of a disease. Make up a new character. You see? Some rules are just stupid. A killer dungeon master is a killer dungeon master, no matter how he kills your dude. Make sure you're playing with a dungeon master that just wants you to have fun. That's the whole point. He wants to create an enjoyable atmosphere. At the same time, he wants to be fair and consistent. If you do something stupid, you should die. But it's got to be fair. Okay. As a dungeon master, it's your job to make sure the game is fair. Consistency. During the game, the players acquire treasure in the form of coinage, gems and jewelry, magic items, that kind of thing. And it's a standard occurrence all through the game, and I've talked in depth about it in other videos, especially in my video Encumbrance. Check that out. One of the responsibilities of the dungeon master through the course of the game is to relieve player characters of excess coinage. Gold pieces, silver pieces, copper pieces, that kind of thing. And when I haggle, a lot of people thought I was very, very vicious when I haggled. I never thought I was that bad. I've known people who were far worse for far less reason. But if you're going to run a game, this is something the dungeon master has to be aware of and has to be able to do effectively. So, the reason that it's a necessity is that if players gain enough gold and treasure to live comfortably, there's really no reason to adventure. If you can purchase a kingdom, why would you want to go out and rob a tomb? You see what I'm saying? If you can live like a king, why go and put yourself at risk? So, yeah, it is imperative that you relieve players of a lot of excess gold. And the other reason is encumbrance. Gold is gold. It's heavy. The gold pieces are actual gold coins, not real gold, but you know what I'm saying. Gold coins have weight. And look at my video, Encumbrance. Gold coins, you can only carry so many of them. So you can't really, you know, most players will convert that to gems and jewelry and stuff like that they can wear, you know, or purchase magic items. And that's some of the ways that a dungeon master can relieve them of this excess coinage. If they want to purchase a magic item, maybe the price gets inflated a little bit. I'm not, you know, you want to, you know, like put a knife to them and gouge them, but, you know, increase the price 20-30%, that kind of thing. Another way is fees and taxes. If they own property, for example, they have to pay taxes. If they want to buy a business license, for example, fees. Okay. Another one is tolls. Whenever you're entering a city, most cities charge a toll to get in. A lot of cities have toll bridges, toll roads, that kind of thing, because they're trying to generate revenue for the kingdom.
And that's a very common occurrence even today, toll roads. So there's a lot of ways to do that. Another way that you can relieve them of their gold is the old-fashioned way. There's a thieves guild. Thieves like money. Oh, look, that guy's packing in a whole big bag of gold. Let's see how much we can get out of there without him noticing. That, they can get robbed. But my favorite way, my absolute favorite way, is through haggling. Now, the way you have to do this in the game, as far as haggling goes, is you have to be familiar with the laws of supply and demand. You can't just say this guy's charging 10 times what it's worth. There's got to be a reason. You have to be able to explain it to the players, or at least give them information so they can reason it out. You can't just say, I'm charging 10 times the amount. Well, there was a war and there's a shortage of whatever it is, horses or swords or whatever. Supply and demand plays havoc with prices. Wars, for example, makes items scarce. Droughts make livestock and food scarce. Because if it's a drought, the crops didn't grow like they were supposed to. There's not near as much grain. Can't make as much bread, that kind of thing. Store owners generally buy goods at less than book price, so a player will come in with an item that he wants to sell, and the whole concept of business is buy low and sell high. So you can buy it for 50 cents on the dollar, 50% book price, and then sell it for a little more. That way you're making money. That's the whole point of a business, is to make money. Store owners generally buy goods at less than book price, but sell them at 20 to 30% over book price, and that allows them to stay in business. See, a little bit of haggling you don't really have to explain. Why there's only 2 horses in town, they're both half dead nags, and you want to charge 5,000 gold each, that you'd have to explain, because book price horses run about between 200 and 500 for a good horse. If you want to charge 5,000 and it's half dead already, you got to have a reason for that. You see what I'm saying? I told a story in one of my videos. I paid 100,000 gold for a horse that was too stupid to eat grass by the side of the road or drink water from the river. Yeah, it died. Sometimes you just have to leak information. You have to let the players know why things cost as much as they do. But the trick is not to gouge them too much, because the players hopefully will catch on and take steps to alleviate the situation. Use it as a learning and a growing experience in the game. Okay. Be mindful of the events going on in your world in order to explain these things. The players go into a town and they're looking to buy horses. And there's horses, we've got a few here, enough for the party, but they're going to be a little expensive. Well, why? Well, one of our neighbors is in a war and they came over and bought a bunch of our horses. There's just not very many horses left. Supply and demand. This country's not in a war, but that country over there is, and they beat you to it. You see what I'm saying?